Good evening, and welcome to our Candidates Forum. My name is Alice Pernick, and I'm co-president of the League of Women Voters of Larchmont, Mamaroneck. Our mission is to empower voters and defend democracy. The League of Women Voters is nonpartisan. We neither support nor oppose any of the candidates. We aim to provide a forum in which candidates can express differing opinions in a respectful manner. If our democratic institutions are to survive and thrive, we can and we must engage in political discourse with a threshold of civility. Voters, this year you really have your work cut out for you. For starters, tonight we'll be hearing from 6 candidates who are vying for your vote for 3 Village of Mamaroneck trustee positions, each of which has a 2-year term of office. In addition to this race, you will be selecting candidates in numerous races up and down the ballot at the national, state, and local levels. And if that were not enough, you must then flip your ballot over to the other side, where you will be called upon to decide on New York State's proposed Environmental Bond Act, which, if passed, would allow the state to borrow over $4 billion to fund projects addressing restoration and flood risk reduction, open space land conservation and recreation, climate change mitigation, and water quality improvement and resilient infrastructure. And Village of Mamaroneck voters, your work is not done yet because there are no fewer than 3 local propositions on the ballot concerning who gets to make certain appointment and removal decisions in the village. Then there's the question of when and where to vote. Once again, New Yorkers can vote early. Passage of the early voting law was a victory for the League of Women Voters in New York, which advocated for decades for such a law with the goal of increasing the state's poor record of voter participation. So if you like early voting, please support the League of Women Voters of Larchmont, Mamaroneck. And when you do that, you're also supporting the county, state, and national leagues of which we are a part, and all of which work to protect and promote the rights of voters to participate in this most fundamental act of democracy. Early voting will begin on Saturday, October 29th, and continue through Sunday, November 6th. Registered voters can cast their ballots at any of Westchester County's 23 designated early voting locations. For those who don't vote early, primary day this year will be on Tuesday, November 8th. On that day only, you must vote at your usual assigned polling site from 6 a.m. until 9 p.m. Voters, we at the League know that this is a lot of information to keep track of. Luckily, the League of Women Voters is here to make it easier for you by providing all the information you need on one website, which is vote411.org. This is my low-tech prop, vote411.org. Simply enter your address. You'll find hours and locations of polling places, a list of all the races, and that will appear on your ballot, and information about the candidates, links to their league debates, information about the Environmental Bond Act, the Village of Mamaroneck propositions, and other election information. So that's Vote411. To help keep you informed, this debate is provided by the League of Women Voters of Larchmont, Mamaroneck. We are a small group of volunteers, but we accomplish a lot. In addition to this candidates forum and other candidate forums, we sponsor local students to participate in the State League's Students Inside Albany program. We host our annual luncheon. This year, our speaker was District Attorney Miriam Roca. We contribute our local information to the Vote411 Voters Guide we just discussed. We welcome new citizens at Naturalization Court and encourage them to vote. We register voters. We keep you informed via our lwvlm.org website. That's this, another low-tech prop. Our Facebook page and our informational email blasts also provide our information. So that's lwvlm.org. We would love for you to become a member, but more so, we really need you to do more than just write a check. We need you to get involved. In order to keep our league going, we need volunteers. We need some of your time and expertise. Although our name reflects our roots in the women's suffrage movement, we welcome members and volunteers of all genders, so please join us. To get involved, you can email me personally at alicepernick@gmail.com. There it is, alicepernick@gmail.com. We'll soon begin our debates. This year, in addition to league-generated questions, members of the public submitted their suggestions for questions for the candidates, and we want to thank those who took the time to send us their questions, suggestions. We regret we will not be able to ask all of them. If you don't hear your question asked, it may be because we combined questions on the same topics, or because of time constraints, or because of non-conformance with our nonpartisan policy. Before we begin, I want to thank LMC Media for their live broadcast and the town of Mamaroneck for the use of the town center. Thanks also to our league member, Terry Toll, who will be serving as our timekeeper tonight. And finally, I want to thank and welcome tonight's moderator, Mr. Stephen Cohen. Mr. Cohen is a retired publishing technologies executive. He's a longtime resident of White Plains, and in accordance with our league policy, he does not vote in Mamaroneck. As a member of the League of Women Voters of White Plains, he served as chair of voter services and completed 6 years as president. He's also a former member of the Westchester County League Executive Committee. We're pleased to have him here with us tonight, and I now turn the debates over to Mr. Cohen.
Thank you, Alice. Good evening and welcome, everyone. The first order of business tonight is the League of Women Voters recording policy. The League of Women Voters owns the forum, and only those permitted by the League may record it, and even those who do so must air the forum in its entirety. Because the FCC requires that a debate must not be edited and must be broadcast in its entirety, either live or reasonably soon after it takes place. Cell phones should be turned off as a matter of courtesy, and unauthorized videos are not permitted. If a candidate is observed to be recording, the moderator will pause the forum and ask the candidate to stop. The moderator will not resume until the candidate does so. The moderator will terminate the forum if that person will not stop or leave. Tonight's candidate forum has 6 candidates running for 3 Village of Mamaroneck trustee positions. The candidates, in order of speaking, are, beginning on my right, Leilani Yazar-Reed, running on the Democratic line, Mr. Howard Dean, running on the Republican, Conservative, and Friendly Village Party line.
Howard Jordan.
Howard Jordan. What did I say?
Dean.
Oh, sorry.
That's okay.
I'm showing my age. Howard Jordan. And then next is Manny Rawlings, running on the Democratic line. To my left is Norman Rosenblum, running on the Republican, Conservative, and Friendly Village Party lines. And then let's see who's after that. Craig Castorella, who is running on the Republican, Conservative, and Friendly Village Party lines. And finally, Lewis Young, who is running on the Democratic line. The speaking order was determined earlier by drawing lots. Each candidate will have 1 minute and 30 seconds for an opening statement, 1 minute and 30 seconds for a closing statement, and 1 minute and 30 seconds to answer each question. Rebuttals are not allowed during the question and answer period. Our timekeeper will indicate when there are 30 seconds remaining and hold up a stop sign when time is up. The candidate will be allowed to complete their sentence, but may not continue when time expires. We will begin with the first opening statement from Ms. Leilani Yazar-Reed. Ms. Yazar-Reed?
Yes, it's all right. Thank you. Good evening. I would like to thank the League of Women Voters for hosting this event. Thank you to my running mates, Lou and Manny, and the volunteers for their endless support on this campaign. I want to thank Mr. Rosenblum, Mr. Castorella, and Mr. Jordan for being present and representing this community with us. As I stated before, I would like to thank this wonderful village community because I truly believe without you, there is no community to represent. Without purpose, what is the meaning? My purpose is to serve. I am a generational Mamaroneck resident whose family has served this community in many ways. I am no exception. My investments in this community continues with my volunteerism commitments to boards like the Mamaroneck School District, REALM, Washingtonville Housing, and the Community Resource Center. And most importantly, how I treat people day to day with honesty, grace, empathy, and respect. This community is in dire need of change, the right change, and how we communicate, change in how we govern, change in how we treat our residents, change in how we respect one another. We need change that brings forth an equitable lens, change that is inclusive, change that heals and not destroys. I believe it is time for the right change to come to Mamaroneck that will not cost people their lives or livelihoods. Change is needed for all of us to grow.
Thank you. Next is Mr. Howard Jordan. Mr. Jordan?
Yes, thank you very much. And again, thank the Women's League voters here. I'm so proud to have an opportunity to serve as a village resident for the last, 63 years now. I've been deeply involved with our community as a community activist. I've had the honors of having a day named after me. I've been involved with our youth for over 40 years now. I run a not-for-profit organization called the Fair Game Foundation, and it just bubbles me over to know that I can continue to serve and hopefully be on the Board of Trustees as we move forward and figuring out the strategies along with the other board members on how we can continue to move the Village of Mamaroneck forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Jordan. Next, we will hear from Mr. Manny Rawlings. Mr. Rawlings.
Thank you. Good evening. I'm Emmanuel Rawlings. I want to thank the League of Women Voters, my running mates, and also Mr. Jordan, Mr. Rosenblum, and Mr. Casarella for being here tonight for this discussion. There are 3 trustee positions on the ballot this year. I seek one of them because it's time to pass the baton to another generation with fresh ideas who can make decisions to move our village forward. Like many residents, I experienced Hurricane Ida personally. That did not stop me from being at the FEMA Center every day to serve all of our village residents. I speak softly, but when push comes to shove, I'm there to do the hard work. I'm a 3rd-generation Village of Mamaroneck resident. I went through all the Mamaroneck schools. I graduated from Iona College, and I work full-time for a not-for-profit, the STEM Alliance, locally. I'm the business manager for our co-op camp program, which is a Mamaroneck School District program here to serve our community, its kids and children. This brings quality summer learning to approximately 230 underserved kids in our community. Please support me and my running mates because there's no more time for inaction. We need to curtail flooding, make our streets safer, and continue the diversity of our beloved village. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Rawlings. Next, we will hear from Mr. Norman Rosenblum.
Yeah, thank you. A level playing field for all who live, work, and visit the friendly village of Mamaroneck based on mutual respect. I am fortunate to join both Craig Casarella and Howard Jordan as a team working towards that very goal. The Village of Mamaroneck voters have a clear and concise choice to change the current divisive nature of the Board of Trustees and choose our team for the village to move forward on a positive and productive effort representing all aspects of a truly friendly village. That preferred choice brings over 130 years of Village of Mamaroneck municipal experience to the 3 of us versus our opponents with little or no municipal government knowledge. And that will come up in our discussions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Rosenblum. Next, we will hear from Craig Casarella. Mr. Casarella.
Good evening. I'd like to thank the League of Women Voters for having us tonight. I'm a longtime resident of the Village of Mamaroneck. My family moved here in the 1950s. I moved back here in 1958. I have somewhere around 64 years in this village. I've done a lot for the community. A member of the Recreation Committee in the 90s, chairman of the Budget Committee in the 90s, fire chief 2 terms in 2000 to 2002, 2010 to 2015. 45 years in the department. I worked for the city of Rye for 40 years. I just retired 2 years ago. I was a foreman of the roads, a foreman of the sanitation, a foreman of the parks, and a tree foreman, which took a lot of time in learning about trees. I could offer a lot to this village.
30 seconds.
All right, she said stop. All right, so I'm looking forward of working with the community, working with my colleagues. I'm so glad to have Howie and Norman and Lana and Manny. I think you guys are great, and Lou.
Okay,
I think
you're going to leave me out.
all right, and I wasn't leaving you out, Lou. It's a pleasure working with everybody, and I will do the right thing by the village.
Thank you. And next, we will hear from Louis Young.
Thank
Mr.
you.
Young.
Good evening to you all. I'm grateful to the League of Women Voters for providing this important forum and humbled by the work of so many volunteers who have helped Lilani, Manny, and me in a process that has been wonderfully instructive and rewarding this campaign. We've been meeting hundreds of village residents, hearing their views about life in Mamaroneck, and forming friendships and relationships that will last for years. We successfully secured an overwhelming endorsement of Democratic voters in the June primary, and now welcome our Republican opponents to the general election that will seat 3 of us on the Mamaroneck Board of Trustees for the next 2 years. This is a critical moment in village history. It's time when we finally turn and confront the flood threat that has confronted this community for decades. I was appointed trustee in January and accepted the position with one promise, that I would put a fresh set of eyes on this government and push it to move past the business as usual mindset without fear or favor. In the past 9 months, I identified dormant river maintenance budget lines. I've lobbied the village manager for a declaration of emergency to address the river flooding problems, secured $1.3 million to restart the river dredging that had been inexplicably suspended years ago. We have finally started to help ourselves when too many were content to wait for others to do it for us. I lived in this area more than 2 decades, and the last 4 years here in the village, last 4 years, my wife and I raised our kids here, both graduated from MHS. I'm determined to open alternate streams of revenue to reduce dependence on property taxes and maintain the intimate charm of this beautiful village.
Thank you very much. So now we come to the question and answer period of tonight's forum. The moderator, I, will read the questions. Each candidate will have the opportunity to respond to each question. The candidates have not been provided with the questions in advance. And to the candidates, it's okay if you're welcome to ask me to repeat a question if that becomes necessary. And so, with that, we will begin the questioning with Mr. Howard Jordan. Mr. Jordan?
Yes.
Oh, I have to ask you a question. I'm sorry, I'm so wrapped up in this.
Government at its best.
What ideas do you have for keeping the budget under control and under the tax cap? What ideas do you have to generate new revenue for the village?
Well, in reference to generating new revenue for the village, I presented to the village of Mamaroneck because my background comes heavy in athletics, and trying to build a multiplex at Harbor Island that would bring significant revenue to the village of Mamaroneck with the restaurants and incoming entry fees and so forth and so on. It would generate about, we figure out about $4 million a year in extra revenue coming into the village of Mamaroneck.
Thank you. Mr. Rawlings?
Can you repeat the question, please?
Certainly. What ideas do you have for keeping the budget under control and under the tax cap? What ideas do you have to generate new revenue for the village?
In regards to the first part of the question, what I believe we do, we need to review how all our budget money is being spent. I think there's a lot of things that we are currently doing in-house, but I think there's more that we can do in-house to kind of reduce the cost of having to go out and pay expensive contracts to get some of the work done. In regards to generating other revenue streams, I think there's a lot of options. I think one of the options we can look at is to at Harbor Island Park. It's a wonderful park, and I think there's areas where we can have kind of like, they're not gazebos, there's another name for them. We can have pavilions, thank you, Leon. There's pavilions we can kind of add to our Harbor Island where we can rent them out so other residents can come in and use those pavilions. I think it's another way, that's one way we can generate more revenue for our community. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll hear next from Mr. Norman Rosenblum.
Yes, actually, based on the history of the 8 years that I was on the board, we did not go above the tax cap. It was done on some basic municipal logic, and that is the first thing we should do is develop a new updated chart of all employees in the Village of Mamaroneck and department heads with specific descriptions of what their jobs are, and look at the pay scale of what's going on and how efficient is the Village of Mamaroneck. And as far as revenue is concerned, that's exactly what you're looking at. Hopefully in another question will come up, and that happens to be the concept of coterminous, which allows the village to become a town village and get more sales tax and mortgage tax and so on. But it also has to do with something that is dear to my heart, and unfortunately, hopefully, when the three of us get in, we'll be able to do it, and that's parking in the Village of Mamaroneck. It is almost on the same level as flooding. There are available proposals to this village that can consider to build tier parking to double the amount of spaces, no cost to the village, with a public-private partnership, and where you have guaranteed income.
Thank you, Mr. Rosenblum. Next, we will hear from Craig Castorello. Mr. Castorello?
Yes, I think the first thing we have to look at is the spending of all our money from the village to keep under the budget. And what I mean by that is we have a lot of expense on lawsuits and overpaying. And I agree with Norm that we have to look further down of parking, keeping the residents under the tax line, and keeping the businesses here to keep the money coming in. I just think that the village right now spends a lot of money, and we need to bring it down to a level field of the taxpayers. I really do.
Thank you. Next, we will hear from Mr. Lewis Young. Mr. Young?
We need to build solar arrays on several locations that the village owns and generate electricity to sell to Con Edison. These are arrays that can be built with our bonding power. We have $255 million worth of bonding muscle behind the village, and then the revenues from the electricity we sell to Con Edison will pay for those projects, and then continue to move into our general fund to defray some of the habitual leaning on property taxes, because property taxes aren't the only way for a village to function. That's an old way of thinking. We could do this in Rhinebeck, Washingtonville, the foot of Mamaroneck Avenue, and at the future Civic Center zone that we envision surrounding the old Village Hall, which is in terrible state of disrepair and has been allowed to just completely deteriorate. This is money that can defray our expenses, and we can create mini grids around them. When there are power blackouts, those parts of the village will not go dark. So imagine an East Coast power blackout where you come up Boston Post Road, and there are neighborhoods in Mamaroneck that aren't dark because somebody thought ahead. What a concept. All right, so that's one thing. There are several others, fee ideas that I have, but that's the main thing, solar arrays.
Thank you very much. And next, we will hear from Ms. Leilani Yazarid.
So I do agree with, in terms of pavilions being a way to generate revenue in our communities, and Lou's idea of solar arrays is a very prominent and resourceful idea for not just for money, but in terms of the environment as well. But I think we can really work with our local our other municipalities to share our resources. I think we can look more towards our local or federal or state grants to see how we can take the burden away from our residents and put it more towards just finding other resources outside of our village to help our village grow.
Thank you. We will begin the responses to the next question with Mr. Rawlings, and this is a lengthy question. There are 3 propositions on the ballot this year which, if enacted, will transfer decision-making authority from the mayor to the entire Board of Trustees. Specifically, the decisions involved are Proposition 1, the appointment of the clerk-treasurer. Proposition 2, the removal of Planning Board and Zoning Board of Appeals members. And Proposition 3, the appointment of a new trustee if there is a vacancy on the Board of Trustees. What is your position on each of these propositions?
Thank you. My position on the three propositions is to vote no on all 3 of them. I think it's really, really important that people know to vote no on them, and because we are a community, we need a mayor, and if we strip all these powers away from our mayor, then we are no longer a board of 4 trustees and a mayor. We're a board of 5 trustees. I don't think that's what our community needs. I don't think that's what our community wants. I just don't think the purpose and fulfillment of being a mayor and having that title mean nothing. It's just its title and its name. And I think somebody has to kind of be the lead of that board, and they need that. And if you are the lead of that board, you need to have those kind of powers. So I do not think it's a good idea and I will be voting no on those 3 propositions on the ballot.
Thank you. We will hear next from Mr. Rosenblum.
Yeah, I have a unique perspective on this as both a former trustee running for office of trustee and being mayor for 8 years in the village of Mamaroneck. I think one has to look at, and I do it as a former public official and also as a political science major and history minor, that one should really look at the New York State Village Law. It clearly describes the position of mayor and the position of trustees and what those powers are. So I could actually campaign and take a position for and against it. The real question is what I said in my opening statement is, the real position that we should be looking at is coterminous. We don't need to be a village. What we need to be is a town village, akin to Harrison and other municipalities. Because what you do then is you eliminate that very question of input of politics, and that's just what it is. And unfortunately, these 2 referendum is a continuation of what happened in 2016, and I believe it's politics. What you want to do is have a coterminous town village where you have more mortgage rates, you have higher tax rates, and the key is you eliminate your town tax. The village of Mamaroneck has all the services that are positive.
Thank you. We'll hear next from Mr. Castarella.
Yes, I believe that should be voted no on all 3, due to it should be an equal playing field with the trustees and the mayor. Given the Board of Trustees all that power is not right without having the mayor say. Taking the stuff from the mayor, his saying, could actually hurt the village of Mamaroneck with just the Board of Trustees having the last say. I think all 3 are in favor for a no.
Thank you. Mr. Young?
No, no, and no on all 3. And the reason being is that we have what some people like to call a weak mayor form of government, and the mayor's weak enough. So taking what few powers the mayor has away and giving them to a board that, frankly, over the years has not shown a great deal of cohesion and competence is a mistake. We need a mayor to lead, and it doesn't matter who the mayor is, we need a mayor. So I think we have a rare instance of bipartisan agreement here that I say no, and I would call them, these are propositions on the ballot. It'll be Proposition 2, 3, and 4, because Proposition 1 is the Bond Act, I believe, the State Bond Act, Mr. Cohen?
Environment.
So we would say that when people flip over the ballot, I would say vote yes on 1, no on 2, 3, and 4. All right?
Thank you. Next, we will hear from Ms. Yazzer Reed.
I guess I'll go with the flow of everybody else, but this is truly a position that I am taking, but voting no on all 3. And I also believe that we need a board that's going to be able to communicate, and I think it's the lack of communication is the reason why these propositions continue to come up. And also just respecting each position. Each position has a role for a purpose. We do need a leader, and there is a board, the trustee board. Respecting each other and understanding that each role has a position, has a role, has a meaning, and we need to keep it that way.
Thank you. Mr. Jordan?
Just to reiterate what Ms. Yazzer Reed said, it's no, no, and no. We have a leader for a reason, and, we choose and we pick and we vote for that leader. And, to take that power away would just really be insane for us. And we would be at disarray with each other, I believe, and that's not the way that we want this to move forward. So it's no, no, and no for me.
Thank you. The next question, we will begin the responses with Mr. Rosenblum. What is your position on the village manager's suggestion to do away with many of the voluntary boards and commissions?
Egregious and crazy, totally uncalled for. The very strength of the diversity of this village is based on its volunteers. What's the next question? Are we going to get rid of the volunteer fire department? Some of the best ideas that I had personally came from volunteers, and I can tell you, I read off just a quick idea. Volunteers that encourage Peggy Jackson, Ellen Houtman, who started Mamaroneck Shares and the Village Block Parties. St. Patrick's Day with Murphy Brothers and Mr. Hines. Catherine and Jim Desmond, who came to us and we started the Marine Education Center, one of the jewels in the village of Mamaroneck. The Harbor Island Conservancy, one only has to go down the Post Road or into the park itself, and you can see the entrances, the signs, and all the playgrounds for the kids. That came from volunteers. Volunteers make up the basic of this country. If it wasn't for volunteers, we'd still be under the United Kingdom. There is any concept why you would get rid of volunteers in the village of Mamaroneck. It's beyond my comprehension that would even be brought up.
Thank you. Next, we'll hear from Mr. Castarella.
Yes, I don't understand why this is coming out, but I do understand that this is a question, and it is my understanding that we want to do away with the volunteer committees. The traffic committee, the recreation committee, the budget committee. We need these committees. This village has run on the committees for many, many years. The Mamaroneck has always had strength from our volunteers, and these committees should not be dismantled. The flood committee. I could go on, the building committee, Larchmont Parks and Recreation of Town and Mamaroneck. These are all things that these committees should all not be dismantled. They should be here, and we should have them.
Thank you. Next, we will hear from Mr. Young.
Mr. Cohen, I'm going to ask you to repeat the question, please.
Certainly.
Because I think it contains some erroneous assumptions.
What is your position on the village manager's suggestion to do away with many of the voluntary boards and commissions?
I don't think he made that suggestion. I got the memo. I got the email. He suggested a review of them. His suggestions to merge some boards, to remove the participation of some staff members, to perhaps eliminate some boards, to consider it, was rejected by the board. The village manager works for the Board of Trustees. This suggestion was never considered. This was a staff member's suggestion that we review it. And it was never considered. So the idea that we eliminate all boards never came up. Not true. Not to my recollection, and it was seized upon by a number of people, but it just is just simply not true, and would never happen. The manner in which those boards would be advising the Board of Trustees, and believe me, their only purpose is to advise the Board of Trustees. That is always open to discussion, and these boards serve at the pleasure of the Board of Trustees. But the issue has been blown up by people who like controversy and want to maybe are not fond of the village manager, but I don't think he suggested that, and what he did suggest we rejected and did not consider. All right?
Thank you.
All right.
We turn next to Ms. Yezer Reed.
I am not in favor of dismantling or getting rid of any of the boards. I believe that the people who serve on these boards and committees are dedicated to their community just as much as all 6 of us who are willing to support and run for as a trustee. So that would be a no. I volunteer in many different ways, so I wouldn't want somebody to stop my volunteerism in terms of just supporting and wanting to contribute something to my community. So that would be an absolute no. I do think that if there was something where we combine some of the boards, if they would like to, then that is something that we can visit. But to get rid of our boards and our committees would not be in the best benefit of our community.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Next, we'll hear from Mr. Jordan.
Thank you. No, we cannot get rid of our volunteers, that work so hard in putting everything together. That's the fabric of the village of Mamaroneck. And I will have to think of myself here a little bit because back in 2015, I was given a proclamation through then Mayor Norman Rosenblum, and it was for 30 years of volunteer service with what I do with the kids in the village of Mamaroneck. And if you did away with different types of volunteers, where would we have been in that realm? So maybe combining some things like what was just said, I can see that, but to get rid of that altogether would really be detrimental to the village of Mamaroneck.
Thank you. Mr. Rawlings?
Thank you. I am not in favor of getting rid of any of our boards, combining maybe, but not to get rid of, those committees and those boards give our residents a chance to volunteer and kind of make their voices be heard about issues or ideas that they can come up with to better serve all of our residents. And, as somebody who sits on our Park and Rec Commission, I wouldn't, it gave me the opportunity to kind of go on, volunteer, and help give a voice of, a lot of our parks. I was on the board when we were talking about redoing some of the basketball courts because I'm very passionate about basketball, and I'm somebody who utilizes a lot of our parks in our community. I just believe that is not a good idea. Volunteers are very important. I work in the nonprofit sector, and I know that volunteerism is really impactful work, and it's really important work, and I wouldn't want to take that away from our residents.
Thank you. With this next question, Mr. Rosenblum will answer first. What measures, if any, should the village of Mamaroneck take to meet the New York State climate reduction goals as set forth in the New York State Climate Act?
Be very active. And quite honestly, when I was in office, I was chosen to represent New York State called Rising Tides, that was attended by representatives from every state along the U.S. coast in this country. Attending was NOAA, Army Corps of Engineers, United States Navy, and so on. And it's a empirical fact that there are rising tides, there are environmental impacts that are happening in the village as well as this country, and whether it be cyclical or not, the village must act now, and not so much for us, but for our children and our grandchildren. And one of the ideas that came about, actually, was, when they called it rising tides, was what Hoboken did, and that is you have to make it available, which we did at one point as far as raising houses were concerned. Because the amount of flood that we've been getting lately, and particularly in Ida, when it went from, the last one was 2007, it was 7 feet, this was 14 feet. You should be raising the buildings in Harbor Island. You should be allowing people that live along the coast to bring fill in, and you should allow them to raise their houses. And also, actually, it's not a new idea, is such things as solar panels. That was brought up before, and for Taylor's Lane and so on. But these are the type of ideas that the Village of Mamaroneck should look at. And there's also plenty of technical information that's being developed throughout this country to do it. It's what we are going to give to our children and grandchildren.
Thank you. Mr. Castorella.
Repeat that question, please.
Certainly. What measures, if any, should the Village of Mamaroneck take to meet the New York State climate reduction goals as set forth in the New York State Climate Act?
Well, very interesting question, and one that deserves further questioning and discussion. When I exactly will be elected, I will look into that, but I do have some on the flooding part. I believe in Mamaroneck, we do have residents in the flood zone that would like to raise their houses, and the village does not have on the books about raising their houses or told they can't raise their houses. We need to dredge and clean the brooks along all the riversides, from Larchmont, Scarsdale, Mamaroneck, Harrison, and that affects the slight building and less water to hold back. I definitely agree with Norm on a lot of this. I'm not familiar with it, but I have some idea about it, and I think we need a level playing field for this.
Thank you. Mr. Young.
The solar arrays would go a long way toward achieving that. We can get our municipal operations off the grid if we apply ourselves. The town in Rockland County that has recently gone to this measure says it can get its operations off by 2025 with solar arrays. The solar arrays are an important part. As for the construction that the former mayor talked about, it came up in 2012. In August of 2012, there was a proposal for the Village of Mamaroneck code to any construction, rehabilitation, addition, improvement to structure that equals or exceeds 50% of the market value of the structure at the time would have to have all these improvements if it happened in the flood zone. And at the time, the mayor referred to the wording of this as financially ridiculous. He says he did not support it. It didn't pass at the time. We've talked about this for years and not done anything, and we can do it. This village board can take positions that we do agree on solar power, renewable energy. We could make it a priority. We can make raising buildings a priority. We can instruct all our boards to do this when they address land use issues, and we haven't done it so far.
Thank you. Ms. Yazar-Reed.
I would agree with, in terms of what Norm said, in terms of attending conferences. I don't believe that any of us are experts on environmental issues, but I think the board or any person who sits in these seats would greatly benefit from having education around environmental issues. I think that we have awesome and amazing groups around Westchester, like Sustainable Westchester, that really specifically deals with environmental issues. We can look to our own environmental committee for as a consult, as they are. That's why they're a particular committee, and look to other communities who have raised the bar in terms of making their villages or their towns or their cities more sound and safe. Raising houses, I know for a fact what that looks like. Because my family's house, both of my brother and my mother's house, is in a flood zone. So I think supporting our residents, ensuring that they have the funds and the support to raise their houses, dredging our waters, fixing the flooding in our community is of utmost importance.
Thank you. Mr. Jordan.
Agreeing with Mr. Rosenblum and also Ms. Yiser Reed here, one, we have to come in and we have to educate ourselves, through the New York State Climate Act, and looking at, with the rising tides and again, taking a look at the cost of being able to raise the houses and the buildings and putting in solar panels, as what Mr. Young had also mentioned, and dredging our brooks and cleaning everything out, would help everything. But we have to really educate ourselves when coming in and taking a look at this to see how we're going to be able to better the Village of Mamaroneck in this act.
Thank you. Mr. Rawlings.
Thank you. I wouldn't be going into this when I'm on the board. I wouldn't be an expert on this. So I agree that the first thing that needs to be done is to kind of educate myself to know more. What can we do? What are our options? I think another key part of it is we need to set priorities and set goals. Where do we want to see our village in the next 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, 20 years? We want to build a sustainable future for our community, and I think to do that, we have to set those goals and priorities. We haven't done that. Look at the flood that happened a year ago, Hurricane Ida. Flooding was something that, we were hit in 2007, it was really bad. We were hit in about 2015, it was horrible, and our community was devastated, and we thought, no, we're past that, and we're never gonna have another 100-year flood. And then September 2nd comes of 2021, and our community is underwater again. As a resident who, was out of my home for more than a month, and to see my whole community kind of destroyed, I think it's time for us to kind of step up and set those priorities, because we can no longer have our community be underwater. The only way to get this done is to set goals and set priorities of what we want to see for our community.
Thank you. We will begin the responses to the next question with Mr. Young.
Correct.
What is your position on development in the flood zone?
Development in this flood zone should be permitted if it improves the situation and not if it adds to it. We approved development in the flood zone during previous administrations that made things worse for their neighbors. There were some large developments there that were built on elevated land that displaced water and made the latest flooding much worse than it should have been. I believe a lot of the buildings in the flood zone should be torn down and replaced with buildings that are elevated, flood resilient, permeable surfaces, solar panels on the roof. I don't want to sound like a broken record, and all the things that would help the situation as we come up with our multi-pronged effort to reduce the amount of flooding. There are some proposed developments on Van Rance, for instance, that are quite remarkable in the innovations they're bringing to the table, but they're being dragged out. The approval process is being dragged out, and what remains is the building that was there all along that contributes to the flooding. Inaction is a decision in and of itself. We have to take some action to improve things. So that's what I agree with as far as development in the flood zone. It has to help.
Thank you. Ms. Yiser Reed.
Can you repeat the question, please?
Certainly.
Thank you.
What is your position on development in the flood zone?
There's many flood zones in Mamaroneck, in the village of Mamaroneck, and it's not just one. But at all times, we need to evolve as a community, but ensuring that when we are evolving, that we're not doing so at the detriment of the community. That is not going to harm our community. If we are going to raise houses, like Lou said, if we're going to raise houses, we ensure that we are supporting, we are providing information, correct information to our residents, because there are a lot of our residents who are still not in their homes since last year. Residents who are just overwhelmed with loans trying to fix their houses. If we can do our jobs by looking for grants, getting more, because we have the money from the federal, but if we work with our state, we work with our local municipalities, and we work with other local municipalities and our county and state governments to find grants for these families and for our village, I think development is possible.
Thank you. Mr. Jordan?
Yes, it comes down to, like, we're going to have to raise homes because, this is something that is going to, I feel, continually happen, and we're going to continually be at this juncture to where we're talking about this. But again, it comes down to education and trying to find out exactly what we need to do financially that makes it beneficial for all. So we're raising that level playing field that we all talk about and make it beneficial for everybody involved. But yes, raising the homes is something that would have to be a top priority moving forward.
Mr. Rawlings?
Can you repeat the question, please?
What is your position on development in the flood zone?
I think any development that kind of comes for the flood zone in the village of Mamaroneck, it needs to be sustainable. I think that's a very key piece. I also think if we're thinking about developing anything in the flood zone, is to get the community's impact, community's voice. What do they believe? What do they want to see in their area? We can no longer just approve, luxury living and complexes in the flood zone, and that don't serve the community, don't serve the people who live in that area of the community, but B, also make the burden more when it rains and we flood. So I think we really need to listen to our community members and understand, and bring ideas to them about what development would they like to see in their community. That's one thing to consider. Another thing to consider is also raising homes. I know that's something that's been talked about for many years. I remember in '07, a couple people raised their homes over on Howard. So I know those are some ideas that can kind of happen. But I think before we think, if we even think of the word development in the flood zone, it needs to be sustainable, and we need communities' support, and we need to have their voices be heard.
Thank you. Mr. Rosenblum?
Yes, this is a prime illustration of why you have volunteer boards. Any development, whether it be in a flood zone or any place else in the village of Mamaroneck, is based on zoning, what's required, what's allowed, and review by the planning board, the zoning board of appeals, HEZMC, and so on. As a matter of fact, the irony is the most recent development, which wasn't a TOD, which was subsequently killed by politics, it allowed for development. Any community that doesn't continue to develop will die from atrophy. The question is really basic. You don't want to be a Nurse Shell. You don't want to be a White Plains. You want to develop and help keep the diversity of the people that are allowed to live here. You need living space, affordable housing. You need people that come here for 2 weeks or here for 2 and 3 generations. The fact of the matter is that the irony is the development and the buildings that went up, there's a requirement of 10 feet above base flood elevation. And you look at things like that, whether it be the zoning board or the planning board and so on, you have to have foresight of what happens in the village of Mamaroneck. And the irony is, in Ida, there were people where I live on Carroll Avenue, Frank and Wagner and other parts, because they had driveways going down. They were flooded. My neighbor had 4 feet in the basement. You have to look at the zoning and what possibilities are there. Raising houses is one. The other one, and I hope we'll get into it, is whatever the Army Corps of Engineers does, you have to go upstream.
Thank you. Mr. Castorella.
Thank you. The way I'm looking at it is that in development in the flood zone, we need to be careful on all our development right now, because the impact is a serious problem with the least amount of space that we have left in along the brook areas and Columbus Park and down in the flats. We keep on developing these big buildings. We did the Mason, and just look after 2007, they thought it was above the flood zone, and they had 4 feet of water even above the flood zone. So if we keep on developing these big buildings and have no place for the water, we're taking land away that soaks the water up. Something needs to be looked at. I'm not saying not to do the development, but we seriously have to look on how we're going to develop along the brooks and the flats. We really do.
Thank you. This next question will begin the responses with Ms. Yazir Reed. Are you in favor of a village dog park? If so, where would you locate it and how would you fund it?
Yes, I am in favor of a village dog park. I will only think of our dog Nico, who used to be a resident of Mamaroneck. But the village, there are plenty of village residents that are in favor of dog park, and I am in favor of it too. Where should it be located? There is a suggested place near the at Harbor Island, near the that's not saying
Sewage treatment.
Thank you, the sewer plant. Thank you, near the sewer plant. If that is the record, if that's the best place that the committee has created or has found, then that's where it should be, because I trust the committee that did their due diligence to find a place. And how should it be funded? The Village of Mamaroneck does have funding, or does have money in store. Okay, does have money, so it could be funded that way, but also to bring back money that village residents will have to pay, will have to pay to have their dog registered to utilize that park.
Thank
So
you.
it's kind of recycles.
Yeah, thank you.
You're welcome.
Mr. Jordan.
Could you read that again, please?
Certainly. Are you in favor of a village dog park? If so, where would you locate it and how would you fund it?
Yes, I am in favor of the dog park. Where it would be located, speaking of the sewage plant, I would also think of the area at the corner of Boston Post Road and Orient Avenue there. That might be also a good location. But I'm most definitely in favor of it, and I think that that Ms. Yazir Reed hit it right on the head, that, having a dog and having memberships that would help fund the dog park would be something that would be a top priority as well.
Thank you. Mr. Rawlings.
Yes, I am in favor of having a Village of Mamaroneck dog park. I don't think we should stop with one, but let's just get one started. I think that's really important that we, take care of our dog owners here. As far as location, as I'm a member of the Park and Rec Commission, and this is something we do, like, as of recently been discussing a lot of, where should we put the park? I think right now the proposed location at Harbor Island, in between the sewage treatment plant, is a proposed good location, but I think it's important that we hear from all our residents of what they believe will be the most ideal spot. I think any place that we have a dog park needs to be walkable. I think we shouldn't be somewhere people have to commute and drive to. I think they should be able to ride their bike. They should be able to walk. It needs to be somewhere where there's water nearby. I think those are key things we need to think about when we're thinking about putting a dog park in the Village of Mamaroneck. When it comes to funding it, I think that to me, that is not an issue. I believe the Village of Mamaroneck has the funding to be able to do that. I think it just comes down to a matter of location. And I think in order to determine the location, yes, as a member on the board, we ultimately have that we will decide where that goes. But I think in order to do that, we need to hear from our community members, as you know, many of them are volunteers on their ad hoc dog park committee or on the Parks and Rec committee. And I think it's important to utilize our volunteers and hear their voices of where the most ideal location for a dog park would be.
Thank you. Mr. Rosenblum?
Absolutely in favor of a dog park. As a matter of fact, the last 2 years we were in office, we had suggested, and why it wasn't put on an O, off Fenimore Road in the village-owned park. I don't think there's anyone on this dais that is not in favor of dog park. I would gather between 30 and 50% of the people in the village of Mamaroneck have some kind of pet, and most likely a dog. But I think it behooves, when we are elected and on this board, you have to make sure that you don't have the conflict. Again, it comes to that magic word, volunteers. The current board did create a new committee to report to the Board of Trustees. And the decision came because there is a difference of opinion. Initially, the question is to put it behind the sewage treatment plant next to where the LMC baseball field is. And then there was another, I think the Recreation Department said, well, let's put it on Rushmore Avenue. And then people from the OPA in Orienta were against that, which is understandable because there are open questions. How about parking? How about liability? You have a dog law in the village of Mamaroneck. Are these dogs they have their shots and so on? You have to look at the responsibility and the fiscal responsibility. When you do this dog park, do it right. If you go to Rye, you can maybe talk to this. There's a whole list of requirements that are there. So the bottom line is, yes, you want the dogs running around, but you want to protect it for the dogs themselves, the owners, and the village itself.
Thank you. Mr. Castorella?
Yes, I'm in favor of that. Like I did say to you earlier in the day, I did work for the city of Rye when they did put their first dog park in at the Rye Beach. And believe it or not, it is a great thing to have in your village. It's well maintained, well run. I think we could use it here for the people of the village of Mamaroneck. I think there should be another location just besides the village, Harbor Island, because our village is big, and have people from the Rye Neck area or the other areas to go just down Harbor Island takes away from the distance that they have to travel for their dog. But I am definitely in favor, and I am in favor of the village funding the dog park. They have rules and regulations, and it'll be not a problem if I'm elected, that's for sure.
And Mr. Young?
Yes, I'm with Manny and Craig on this, and Lilani. At least one dog park, at least one. I like the location that was originally chosen by the committee at Harbor Island. If they come up with a better location, we can entertain that, but so far I think that looks like the best one. It must be walkable. Again, agreeing with Manny on that. It can't be something you have to drive to, because people should be able to walk to it. That also goes to sustainability, which is what will help us reach our goals for that. You don't want to be making people drive to something they should be able to walk to. The funding for it, if we feel we need to fund it, and if it costs a couple of bucks, it wouldn't be the worst thing in the world, because it's a service. But most people don't have dog licenses in the village, even though they're supposed to be required. So if we got people to get their dog licenses, we could probably generate funds. This could probably do this at a profit. Not that that's the reason to do it. And I like the village manager's idea about having fobs to get in, so we know who's coming and going. I know not everybody's wild about that, but I like that. I like to have a little bit of a control over it. And I would also like to examine our rules about dogs in general, because I think they should be allowed in the park on a leash. All right, there you go.
Thank you. This next round of questioning will begin with Mr. Jordan, And the question is, the local waterfront development program has been the law in our community for 40 years. What do you see as its value? How does it help the village? And do you support it as written?
I support it as written, and to be honest with you, there's a lot more that I don't know. So with that, I just support it as written. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Rawlings.
Can you repeat the question, please?
Certainly. The local waterfront development program has been the law in our community for 40 years. What do you see as its value? How does it help the village? And do you support it as written?
So this is something I'm not an expert on or not too familiar on the benefits and negatives of it. So I think it's something that, if it's something that's been upheld for this many years, I think in order for me to really comment and give a better answer, I would really need to understand the nuances of it. So, but I think that's, yeah.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Rosenblum.
It's an integral part of the Village of Mamaroneck. We're a waterfront community. The LWRP is the Bible that when people go before the HGZM and the Planning Board and so on, you have to be consistent that you stay within the guidelines of the LWRP. It is to protect the waterfront. And as a matter of fact, if you go back to the very beginning, when it first happened before it was even HGZM, the biggest group that owned property were the clubs in the Village of Mamaroneck. And it was done in conjunction with those clubs that you would maintain, not only the clubs, but McMichael's and any other boat yards. You have to maintain the waterfront character in the Village of Mamaroneck. There are requirements that are also from the state as well as the local guidelines in the Village of Mamaroneck. And you must be consistent with those guidelines to maintain, in essence, the environment. You want an environment that is friendly, whether it be the coastline or, as a matter of fact, the LWRP is village-wide. So if you want to do anything on the rivers, in fact, you have to do it. So it's a guideline to protect the character of the Village of Mamaroneck.
Thank you. Mr.
And one quick thing, I think I had 13 seconds left. What we also did was we changed the zoning on the Post Road to maintain the fact that you didn't become like a Miami Beach where you can't see the water anymore. It's restricted. You cannot build high-rises on the Post Road from Mamaroneck Avenue down to Orienta. That's a very important aspect, and that's why you have an LWRP.
Thank you. Mr. Castorella.
Yes, the LWRP is about vision, goals, and objectives for future use of our waterfront. Constructions should work closely with the Harbor Coastal LWRP to obtain technology assistance. The LWRP section maps, projects, and local laws are a guideline. Our Long Island Sound coastal and development community reclaiming the quality of natural resource, refreshing the working waterfront, and continue people to the Sound Shore. I'm all in favor of it and not to change it.
Thank you. Mr. Young.
It's been about 8 months since I first walked up to this vehicle that is the Village of Mamaroneck government and opened the hood, and there's a lot of stuff there, and I can tell you the LWRP I support completely in concept, but it's a pretty thick and complicated document, and I'm certain there are things in it that I might not find to be just perfect. So I don't want to say as is, because I've found things in our code and in our past consistency of enforcement and our policies that have been troublesome, and I think I'm not going to just say outright, yeah, LWRP, it's all good. I know for some things that, like the dog park, have been held up by people who think that it needs to go before the Harbor Coastal Board, and that's, we're still waiting on that. There can be a lot of red tape by folks who fall in love with the alphabet soup and lose sight of the reason why the alphabet soup exists. So yes, I love the concept. I want to get further under the hood and take a look at it before I say everything in it is great. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Yazar-Reed?
I'm going to ask you to repeat the question, please.
Sure. The Local Waterfront Development Program, LWRP, has been the law in our community for 40 years. What do you see as its value? How does it help the village? And do you see it, and do you support it as written?
Well, I personally thank you for the tutorial as it went down about this particular program. If it's something that has helped our village, then yes. If it's something that needs to be looked at, as Lou was saying, get under the hood and possibly adjusted or changed, then we can go down that road. I think that as a whole, possibly maybe the reason why I didn't take a look at it before coming to this particular debate is that when we're even sitting in these seats and wanting to run, we do not have enough mentoring programs to even tell us or to educate us or to even suggest. You know, a lot of people keep things in secret so that it can be a surprise to some persons, but knowledge is power, I believe, and the more I'm learning, the more I can grow. So with this, I'm not all knowledgeable, but I can become knowledgeable and lean on our Harbor Coastal Committee to educate me on this subject. So thank you.
Thank you. The next round of questioning begins with Mr. Rawlings, and the question is...
He did.
Yeah, I answered, yeah.
Yeah.
I sort it.
Yeah.
We're good. Thank you, though. Mr. Rawlings, what is your position on marijuana dispensaries and marijuana consumption lounges in the village of Mamaroneck?
Thanks for the question. Marijuana dispensaries has been a very popular topic in our community the last couple of years. I remember when our neighboring municipalities immediately shot it down. I remember our board took the right steps and did the right thing of getting community feedback on what they believe they should want for their village. I think it is something that we've already opted out, so I think to go and have that be changed is already a battle in itself. If it's something our community believes in and it would, and something that they want, I would be right behind it and for it. I think we have this stigma and this negative view on what marijuana is and this fear of what it would kind of come and bring to our community. And I just think with more education from not just myself, but for our residents, they would understand that it is not something that people need to be feared. We don't have the same fear when we go and think of, alcohol stores that are in our areas, or bars are all over our community. We don't have the same, stigma and negative view on that. But when we come to think of marijuana dispensaries, our community was not for it. And I just want to also reiterate that, if we did opt in, it does not immediately put a dispensary in our community. It kind of gives us the ability, if we wanted to build one in our community. So I would be for it. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Rosenberg.
I am 100% against it. I think it's a slippery slope. I think it's one of the major problems in this country. Opiate drugs and other habitual drug use is the third reason and cause of death in this country. We started the Mayor's Cultural Drug Committee. We had individuals such as James Abadi who made presentations to the schools. We've had, I believe, 6 to 8 OD deaths in the village of Mamaroneck in 1 year. As far as selling marijuana in the Village of Mamaroneck, it's asinine. It's based on New York state law, which was passed, and in my opinion, strictly for money only. I think it is a danger, and as a matter of fact, this is one of the prime reasons that show a difference between our opponents and ourselves. The fact that we had passed a local law for no smoking in the village parks, and then because of a legal reason, you had cannabis was not a tobacco, you then had to change the law. Trustee Young voted against it. The basic concept is, I guess he's in favor of smoking marijuana in a park where the kids play and everything else. It is a dangerous, slippery slope. It is a gateway drug, and is the most dangerous concept you can do in this village is to bring marijuana smoking into the village. I think it's obnoxious, and it's critical, and it's just dangerous.
Thank you. Mr. Castorella.
Yes, thank you. My reasons for not having a marijuana dispensary, there's a lot of them. I'm just going to touch on a few. As a member of the fire department, I hear everything that comes in all over the state, police and fire radio. Believe it or not, I hear a lot of children ODing on gummy bears that are laced with CBD. And I'm just going to give you some things about what I have, okay? I don't believe it should be a dispensary in our village when all other towns and villages around us voted no. Again, 6 villages and towns and cities voted no to have a dispensary in their villages, okay? That is Harrison, Portchester, Rye, Town of Mamaroneck, Larchmont, and Rybrook. I believe that it's only going to bring bad habits to our children. I believe if persons need for marijuana reasons, the doctor can prescribe it. I don't believe that we need that here to have our children seeing other kids going in there and think it's all right. I really don't. We have a place in the village here, just listen to the radio, that wouldn't believe the kids that go in there between the ages of 14 and 17 and buy this stuff. I'm against it, dead against it.
Thank you. Mr. Young.
Okay, speaking of obnoxious, Mayor Rosenblum, the vote I took was because I wanted to, didn't want to pass another rule that was not enforced, because no one has ever been charged with smoking anything in any park in the village ever, according to our village justices. But you like to pass laws that just make you feel good and nobody enforces, so that's all well and good. I wanted a full review of it, not because I want people to smoke marijuana in the parks. That is offensive. I would say also that I'm not for this because there seems to be very vehement opposition to it, and I understand that. And despite Mr. Reefer Madness over here going all ballistic about marijuana, it is not different from opioids. I get that it's legal. We're not going to have it in the village because people don't want it. That's why, but not because I can make a political point out of it and scare people, because we have other problems, and this is not one of them. It's not on the table. It's not something we're going to consider. What is on the table is neglect over flooding, and people who have to worry about it their lives every time it rains because of a decade of neglect for previous administrations. That's the real problem, Mayor Rosenblum, not imaginary dispensaries for marijuana.
Thank you. Ms. Yazza Reed.
I am neither for or against. I know that the community has spoken and stated that they do not want the dispensaries in the community. As a trustee, it's not my opinion and my sole opinion only to say whether it is or isn't. It's about the community, what they want, what they vote on, and if the community has voted no, then it is a no right now. So I truly believe that education is key to understanding what marijuana is, how does it affect individuals. Yes, things are there have been overdoses, not necessarily the main reason being marijuana is because it is possibly laced with fentanyl. I do have a very large background in terms of prevention work with adults and youth. So I truly believe that any type of drug or alcohol, prevention and education is always key in anything that we do.
Thank you. Mr. Jordan.
Could you please read it again?
Certainly. What is your position on marijuana dispensaries and marijuana consumption lounges in the village of Mamaroneck?
Okay, sticking to the question just asked, I am against it. You know, one, it causes a divide like we're having, you know, right now, and I think that, you know, there's some pros in reference to marijuana, and then there's some cons, and, you know, but for the village of Mamaroneck that we're speaking about, having a dispensary, you know, I think that it would be an ugly scene, and that's just something we don't want because we have bigger issues that we have to continue to address with, like flooding, so forth and so on. So for me, that would be a no.
Amen.
Well, thank you. For this next question, we'll begin the responses with Mr. Rosenblum. And the question is, what is your position on the New York State Environmental Bond Act? If it is passed, how do you envision using any funds that may be appropriated to Mamaroneck?
Well, presuming it's passed, you use those funds based on whether you bring in consultants or you bring in the new engineer and so on, and figure out best how to use it to improve the environment. But I will say I'm going to use my time to go back because it's very important. I believe as far as marijuana is concerned, it is a gateway drug. It is extremely dangerous in the village of Mamaroneck. I think next to flooding, it is one of the most important subjects that must be addressed continuously through education and so on, as was done in the past. And I would also know, as far as, since you want to make comments, Trustee Young, that following the rules and regulations, and let's go to the most important fact, which would be the environment, which is flooding. I believe that when I was on the board, we did not dredge. Dredging you don't do. You do silt removal and you banking, which we did twice, with permission. So to make, while the Army Corps of Engineers is making a presentation to the village, Trustee Young says, well, it's up to me, forget the damn permits, we'll just go in and do it. You can't do that, because then you're opening up the village to fines and potentially even threatening the very flood mitigation program itself.
Thank you. I'll just remind all the candidates that I encourage you all to focus on the issues and not on personalities at this point. Next in the order is Mr. Castorella.
Just read that again, please.
Certainly. What is your position on the New York State Environmental Bond Act? If it is passed, how do you envision using any funds that may be appropriated to Mamaroneck?
Well, I hope if it is passed and Village of Mamaroneck does get funded, I think the first thing we should start on in figuring out how to stop the water from flooding downtown Mamaroneck. It's a costly expense, and I think that money could be used in building a new dam, dredging the reservoir, looking up the line to put retaining places of holding the water back, then getting back to us with a fishbowl. So everything comes down to us. We're the last resort before the water goes out to the harbor. And I think the funding, I would like to see it used to stop the flooding here and build whatever we need to take care of the residents of the Village of Mamaroneck flood zone.
Thank you. Mr. Young.
I've said repeatedly it is the most important thing on the ballot, and that says a lot for somebody who's on the ballot, that you should turn it over. Number one is the first thing, because things we have to do and will do anyway can get paid with that state money. To address Mayor Rosenblum's suggestion that they did not dredge, I have in front of me here the contract from October of 2010, contract for rigid dredging with Landy Contracting. The work was done over at Fenimore Avenue, and to the tune of $86,000, much of it was FEMA money. They dredged once, they did not dredge again. That same year, they opened up a line for river maintenance, put money in it, never used it. Several years later, they approved $180,000 for a excavator to take the debris out of the river, never purchased it, never moved forward. 10 years of neglect went by. They knew from 2007, from Hurricane Irene, that the rivers were silted and clogged. They made cursory passes to fix it, and then let it sit for 10 years. And that neglect led to what happened a year ago. Some of that flood belongs to somebody on this dais.
Thank you, Mr. Young. Ms. Yazar-Reed.
Can you repeat the question, please?
Sure. What is your position on the New York State Environmental Bond Act? If it is passed, how do you envision using any funds that may be appropriated to Mamaroneck?
I am in favor. I will vote yes on the Environmental Bond Act. And if passed, which willingly, God willingly, it will be, of course, because flooding is a huge issue in our community, building or rebuilding or fixing our dam is very important. Continue to clean our sewers, continue to dredge our rivers, take care of our broken down or unusable bridges. I would love to see more community gardens to help plant and grow our own foods, another way that just bring more life to our community. And just anything that can help our residents in terms of planting trees, ensuring that we have safe and drinkable and usable water. All of those things I would like to use with the Environmental Bond Act.
Thank you. Mr. Jordan.
Yes, I would vote yes. And with the environmental issues and things that we've all been talking about all night long, yes, we have to attack the flooding mitigation. You know, we have to make sure that we allot a lot of the money, towards that, and what we spoke about before with raising houses and dredging the reservoir, and because like what Mr. Castorella had said, that everything runs downhill. We've been sitting in a fishbowl for as long as I could ever remember. When we were kids growing up, this flooding was taking place back in the 60s. So, and beautification, and yes, just all the environmental issues that we would need, that, we would then put the funds over towards anything and everything that needs to take place to make this more important to us.
Thank you. Mr. Rawlings?
I am all for kind of, hoping that this Environmental Bond Act passes. This is something that would greatly, impact our community if it passes. It would give us the opportunity to continue doing the work that, after Hurricane Ida, to continue the work of dredging our rivers and making sure our waterways are clear of debris, to be able to do that work, but, reduce the cost. We talked about cost tonight, and something like this would be able to help, hold our budget online and make sure we're not going over. And I believe that it's really important that if, when this is passed, that we prioritize any amount of money from that, it is to help mitigate flooding. We need to create a kind of pronged approach to this. We have the Army Corps of Engineer plan. If this money kind of comes in, it gives us another way for us to be able to use funding to have an approach to basically mitigate flooding, so when it rains, our residents don't have to fear, is it going to get too high? Are we going to lose our homes? What's going to happen next? We wanted them to be able to sleep safe at night and not fear when it rains, and this is good. This will give us an opportunity to help mitigate flooding even further beyond the efforts we already are completing now.
Thank you very much. We'll begin the next round of questions with Mr. Castorella. And the question is, if elected, what do you see as the most pressing priority in the village of Mamaroneck besides flood mitigation?
Thank you. Besides the flood, I think the next important thing is having a place for our kids to go. We have nothing here in the village of Mamaroneck for our children. And we need a recreation center badly. Keep the kids off the street, to keep them busy. Every community around us has a recreation community, with the exception of the village of Mamaroneck. I think that's a big priority here. I think it would help. It'd give the kids some place to go, things to do. Harrison is just rebuilding a recreation. They have tennis courts, basketball courts. They're going to have swimming. They're going to have classroom work for the kids, exercise. These are all things that could be a big part of this village, besides the flooding. And there are other things, but I'm looking out for the children of our community, and there's nothing here for them. That's all I have.
Thank you. Mr. Young.
Yes? Give me the question again, I'm sorry.
If elected, what do you see as the most pressing priority in the village of Mamaroneck besides flood mitigation?
Well, recreation is important, and I think that when we redo the Civic Center around the old Village Hall, I think a rec center needs to be part of that. I don't know why we don't have a pool here, but that is something I would like to look at down the road. But accessible, affordable housing is a key, because right now, what we've done over the years, if we've stuck all our affordable housing in the flood zone, and we can't upgrade it without displacing people. So we need to give people a place to live that doesn't flood, and while we try to deal with that. So I would also go toward that. We have some ideas of where that can happen, and a good mix of income levels that would work to get it to get that rolling, because we have a community unlike the ones that surround us that is less of a bedroom community and more of an actual functioning community with a working class and people who live and work here. The other thing is I want to do, and one of the first things we're determined to do, is to synchronize our elections with the federal schedule, which is something that League of Women Voters is behind. I want that to be the very first item, so we have elections every 2 years and eliminate the off-year elections. All right, that's it.
Thank you. Ms. Yazir Reed.
So what is important to me is just maintaining and ensuring that our community stays diverse. And diversity can mean a whole lot of things. It can mean it can include age, gender, ethnicity, ableism, income level. Like Mr. Castorella was saying, ensuring that our youth have programs, they have resources that are equitable, ensuring that all families could afford to utilize these resources. Housing is of utmost importance. Not everybody can maintain or live here. our cost of living is very high. We are creating more and more opportunities for people to live, but is it inclusive to all people on all income levels? Most kids who graduate from this community cannot come back to their community to live, and that's an important thing. Having accessible walkways for all people, for whether they're in a wheelchair or they can walk as is. Restoring our infrastructure, improving and diversifying our business district. These are the things that are important to me moving forward outside of flooding.
Thank you. Mr. Jordan.
Okay, so sorry. Yeah, a bunch of bullet things here that I had written down. But at the top of my list is affordable housing. You know, we speak about the level playing field. The playing field right now is not level. You know, they're building up some really nice townhouses and condos and so forth and so on, and they'll put in, you know, 1 or 2 units that they want to call affordable housing, but it's not affordable to all. So, you know, we have to, you know, again, you know, if we're continually building our infrastructure, we have to really allot for affordable housing for all, you know, that is, you know, going to be attainable and keep the diversity of what we have, you know, here now, which is a stark difference as a kid growing up. After-school programs, I'm a big component, you know, for that, you know, but one of the things other than just recreation and playing basketball is having different type of literacy programs, you know, for our kids. You know, being a kid, young man from the Strawberry Patch and the Flats, what we call Washingtonville, and coming out of Mamaroneck Avenue School, you know, there was always like a stigma to the kids that came out of Mamaroneck Avenue School, you know, because of where we lived, and we didn't have any literacy programs. So that is something that has to be a major component as well. Thank you. Sorry for the running over.
That's okay. Mr. Rawlings.
Something that I believe that, you know, that if flood mitigation is as a priority, I think the next thing is true affordable housing in our community. We don't have any sufficient kind of affordable housing. I know we heard Leilani talk about it, and Mr. Jordan over here talk about it. We've all kind of mentioned it. It's something that, you know, this has become even more apparent for, you know, many of us in our village after Hurricane Ida. You saw many people be displaced from their homes, and many are still not back in their homes, and they can't even come back to our community because there's nowhere for them to go. When I think of affordability, I just don't think of, I'm not only talking, you know, for our low income or middle income kind of families, but also our seniors. We can't just forget about them. These are people who have been here for generations, and they built their homes here, they built their families here, they built their way of life in our community, and to just think that if they want to downsize, they have to downsize, and they can't even come and live in the same community that they kind of help build and grow to love. So I think when I think of affordable housing, I think of true affordable housing that goes from everybody on the scale. That's everybody and you know, anybody from a young adult like myself or a senior who's looking to downsize but loves our community so much and wants to be able to stay in our community.
Thank you. Mr. Rosenblum.
Yes, beyond the Army Corps of Engineers project, even when that's done, I believe it is imminent and required that the village work with the county to create a river district. So you have retention, and you have 100% retention and flood control in Rye, Harrison, Rye Brook, Armonk, White Plains, and Scarsdale. It is imperative that we stop the flooding from there with 110 retention. That's one. Two, I'm favoring parking structures to double the available parking in downtown Village of Mamaroneck, which has been done before and proposed. Unfortunately, was turned down by a majority of the board. This is a project that does not cost the village anything. It's a public-private enterprise where the village property is used and a private entity puts up the parking structures, they run it. The Village of Mamaroneck is guaranteed revenue. That helps the downtown business. Of course, I think that the next one is coterminous. I mentioned it before. This is for taxpayer benefit. If you do not need to improve or expand the services that the Village of Mamaroneck already does. But if you change it and have a coterminous town village like Harrison, you get a higher return on your sales tax, you get a higher return on the mortgage tax, and you eliminate a duplication of paying taxes to your towns and getting no services for it. I think that developing recreational programs, both passive and active for kids, seniors, and adults, as mentioned, is always something that should be done in the Village of Mamaroneck. But even more so, one of the reasons, actually, when I decided to run again, is I think that has to return to civility and mutual respect on that board. When you watch those board meetings, and the division is just unacceptable.
Thank you. Well, we've come to the conclusion of the Q&A period. Before we move on to closing statements, I just want to thank all of the candidates here tonight for your thoughtful and articulate responses to the questions and focusing on the issues. So thank you to all of you. Each candidate will now have a minute and 30 seconds for a closing statement, and we will begin those closing statements in the same order that we undertook the opening statements, which means that Ms. Leilani Yazarid will go first.
Thank you. I am a multifaceted creative being who knows many things but does not claim to know everything. Some people would like to point out the fact that I or we don't have experience, and they may be right. I don't have experience being a politician, but I do have experience being systematically marginalized. I do have experience with flooding. I do have experience creating programs and discussing policy. I do have experience being a human, wanting the best for myself and others. I may not have your experience, and in the end, I'm not supposed to, but I have my own. I will always tell people that they have a choice. There is so much power in having a choice and having that freedom to make your own choice. Being able to make a sound decision comes from listening and gathering information. I have made the choice to want to serve this community at this capacity, and now it is your turn to make your own choice. And if you have any questions that are still not answered, please call me. Truth always lives within me. I'm grateful to be a Black woman in this space and time. I am running with two individuals who are committed to this community and all that it can evolve into. We three would appreciate your support and, most importantly, your vote this election season. Thank you and be blessed.
Thank you. Mr. Howard Jordan.
Thank you. I want to thank everyone for being here and having an opportunity to voice our opinions on all the questions that were asked. I've been a resident here now for 60-some-odd years, and I love Mamaroneck, and this is why I stayed and giving back to my community, and always trying to stay as humble as possible. And, you know, I'm so proud to be running with Mr. Craig Castorella and Mr. Norman Rosenblum. I'm extremely proud to my left and to my right, knowing Ms. Yazarid and Mr. Rawlings since birth, you know, and having everyone to come together here and trying to figure out exactly, you know, what we need to do to make the Village of Mamaroneck, you know, the place that we all grew up in and love so dearly. So, you know, no matter what you do or how you take a look at this, you know, you're going to get good teams in, and I feel really good about that. So, again, I thank you all for having me, and I thank Mr. Rosenblum and Mr. Castorella for being a part of what we do. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Emmanuel Rawlings.
Thank you. I want to thank, again, you know, the League of Women Voters, you know, my running mates, Leilani Yazarid and Lou Young, and also Mr. Castorella and Rosenblum and Mr. Jordan for kind of being here tonight. And you know, this kind of discourse is important to kind of go and have these conversations because we're both all very passionate about our communities. I also want to thank all the volunteers helping with our, you know, our team to kind of to help run and, you know, push our ideas to, you know, to push the village forward. Mamaroneck has made me who I am. and my mission is to continue to serve our entire community with the goals of preserving our strengths and continuing our diversity. I believe it is time to pass the baton to another generation with fresh ideas who can make decisions to push our village forward. I'm asking for your support for myself, Leilani, and Lou, because there's no more time for inaction. We bring a fresh perspective on flooding, making our streets safer, and good governance. You know, the era of obstruction is over. I want to leave you with this. We are 3 generations running to serve one village. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Norman Rosenblum.
Yeah, thank you. I would like to take and expand on the concept of volunteers. And first, Mr. Joe Liberti from Mamaroneck High School and his AP programs. So I'd like to publicly thank Andrew Glinsky, Jordan Kraut, Luca Giobio, Cameron Silvers, Austin Shepard, Stephen Sammy, Sean Hugelmeyer, and Olivia Tennant. Those are volunteers and the future of the village of Mamaroneck that are participating in this campaign and other campaigns, quite honestly. I also believe that we have to return common courtesy to those that appear before the board, whether you agree or disagree. It has been experienced and comments made to me, as well as watching village board meetings, that does not exist. You have to have the mutual respect. And as a matter of fact, when you get stuff like that, I would like to take not credit, but claiming one of the best things we did is by participating with volunteers and so on. The village of Mamaroneck led anti-puppy mill legislation as precedent setting in New York State, and actually followed by several states and communities in the village of the United States. There's something else I mentioned before about doing a review of all department heads and employees. The communication I've had with village employees, there appears to be a very low standard of morale in the village of Mamaroneck. People are waiting until they meet their goals, and then they're getting out of the village of Mamaroneck. There's something wrong there, and it has to be done.
Thank you. Mr. Craig Castorella.
Yes, thank you very much. Just like to take the time to thank everybody, the League of Women's voters, everybody sitting here. This is just so easy to be up here and proud to stand by the village. I'm asking everybody to come out and vote for our team, myself, Howie, and Norm. It's been a pleasure working with you, gentlemen, Mrs. Yiser, Mr. Rollins, Mr. Young. It's a definitely pleasure. And I'm going out to the public to come out and vote for us so we can make a difference and make a change. That is our team, to make a change, a friendly village. I don't believe I know everything. I'm a very honest person. If I don't know it, I will tell you I don't know it. I will investigate it, but I think it's time for a change. And I appreciate everybody that came out. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Lewis Young.
Okay, thank you. I have, I've seen a lot in 43 years as a TV journalist and approaching a year now as a trustee and deputy mayor. And I know enough to know that I don't know it all, and I'm learning. So I listen, and we've been listening during this campaign. And I find out that the loudest voices are not always the ones that speak with wisdom. It's important to seek out the silent, the quiet ones living their lives and perhaps believing they don't have a say because up to this point, perhaps they haven't. When people come before the Board of Trustees, I try to look at them as one of 20,000, not somebody, oh, here's the same guy again. And sometimes it's the same people over and over again. But too often it has been a collection of friends and relatives that run the village, and it needs to be expanded. I mean, it's not a small club, and I'll tell you, up until 2 years ago, we didn't have a human resources department in the village because, well, you know how to get a job. You had to know somebody. I'm going to say that. As far as the experience goes, that our Republican opponents have talked about experience. I appreciate experience, and I think experience can help us going forward. But if you were involved in 10 years ago, especially with the flooding issue, you can start out by apologizing for our shortcomings and then move forward. If you don't admit that it wasn't all well done, then you don't have much to build on. And that's it.
Thank you very much. So this concludes tonight's League of Women Voters of Larchmont Mamaroneck Candidates Forum for candidates running for the 3 Village of Mamaroneck trustee positions. On behalf of the League, many thanks to all 6 candidates for their enthusiastic participation this evening and for their willingness to participate in the Village of Mamaroneck government. A reminder that Election Day is Tuesday, November 8th. Voting is from 6 a.m. to 9 p.m. at your regular polling places. Early voting commences Saturday, October 29th, and runs through Sunday, November 6th. Voting hours vary by day during that period. Please refer to the Westchester Board of Elections website for voting locations and when the polls are open each day during early voting. And when you vote, be sure to remember to flip your ballot over and vote for the state and local ballot propositions that are on the other side of the ballot. And last, remember to check out the League's website, vote411.org, for information about all the election races that you will be voting in. Thank you and good night.
Thank you. Thank you.